Our next guest on the program is Liberal Senator James Paterson, joining us from our Melbourne studios. Senator, thanks very much for your time. You're not in Canberra today. You're not getting in on the front bench. Are you looking at your colleagues and saying, oh, I could have done a better job than that bloke?
Thanks, Tom. What an introduction. No, look, I'm really happy for my colleagues. There's some really outstanding promotions on Scott Morrison's front bench. I think it's a really good mix of experience and new talent coming in. So I'm really excited for them and very content continue to do what I do.
One of the appointments raising some eyebrows is Stuart Robert. He's had some issues in the past, hasn't he? Does this surprise you at all, going all the way into Cabinet?
Oh, Stuart Robert is, I have to say, in a crowded field, one of my most energetic and hardest working parliamentary colleagues. He's just got incredible energy and incredible passion for everything he does. He can't do anything at half pace. He just runs at a bullet a gate. And actually, for an issue like the NDIS, which he's been given charge of, that's exactly what we need. A minister who's going to be really engaged, really on top of it, really get stuck into it and make sure that it fulfils the promise that it has been to the people with disabilities. So I'm sure Stuart will do a very fine job.
Yeah, a very important job, the NDIS, given some of the issues people have had with the bureaucracy of it. Doing that, though, is going to require avoiding future damaging headlines, surely.
Well, Scott Morrison talked about the need for some congestion busting in the bureaucracy, and I can say in my capacity as a senator assisting my constituents with NDIS claims, bureaucracy is one of the things that they experience the most frustration with. It's ridiculous how long it takes for just some small minor things to get fixed. So it's hard to think of anyone better than Stuart to really drive that change. So I think he'll do a really good job.
What a moment for Ken Wyatt, the first Indigenous Australian into Cabinet and as the Minister for Indigenous Australians. A really significant moment today in that building. You're
right, Tom. It's a really historic moment, and it continues a lot of historic firsts for the Liberal Party in the area of Indigenous representation. The first ever Indigenous parliamentarian was a Liberal senator. The first ever Indigenous House of Reps member was an Indigenous Liberal, and the first ever minister was an Indigenous Liberal. So Ken Wyatt is just the latest in a long line of firsts for the Liberal Party, and it's a really proud moment for our party and for our country. And I'm sure Ken will bring his customary wisdom and experience and thoughtfulness to his new responsibilities.
And Trevor Evans, I should note, the first openly a gay member, man, I think, gay man in the executive. Can I ask as well, though, about Ken Wyatt, because he has spoken about the Indigenous voice to Parliament being something he wants to be pursued. What do you make of that proposal and what we know of it so far?
This morning in the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, Tom, there were some really measured and thoughtful comments from my colleague Julian Leeser, who has done a lot of work in this area. He was a co-chair of a committee that looked at this in the last Parliament. And he made what I thought was a fairly profound point, which is that essentially, in the modern era, referendums do not succeed without bipartisan support, and even with bipartisan support, they can still fail. So it's very important that any proposal to change the Constitution is a very well thought out one that has broad community support. We are not at that point yet on constitutional recognition, and it may be some time before we get there, because the proposals that have been put forward, in my view, are very light on detail, are very vague in concept. In fact, the Labor Party's policy at the last election was to put a vote to the public to change the Constitution without any of the detail, which they said we would work out afterwards. Now, that is a crazy, crazy proposal that is certain to fail, and I think if that had proceeded, it would have done great damage to the cause of reconciliation in Australia, so we can't afford to go down that path.
So, yeah, you want to see the detail, fair enough, but the concept of this possibility of an Indigenous voice to Parliament, which advocates say, look, this is not a third chamber, there's no binding power here. Is that something you are open to?
As a matter of principle, Tom, I do have a problem with the idea that some Australians should have a representative body enshrined in the Constitution that they get to vote for or choose on the basis of their race that is not extended to other Australians. I have real reservations about that, because I think ultimately our foundational document, our Constitution, should be as free of race as possible and should not seek to divide Australians according to their race. I think that would be potentially a dangerous and backward step. So this needs to be hastened very carefully. I absolutely understand the aspiration of Indigenous people to have a great greater say in policy making, and I think that's a really important thing to do. I'm not sure that a new body enshrined in the Constitution is the way to do that.
Can you see yourself ever supporting that, or is that principled stance going to remain no matter what detail you see coming forward? There's nothing that could alleviate your concerns?
Well, I've been following this debate for some time and have had quite a bit to say about it over the years, both in Parliament and prior to being in Parliament. I approach it with as open a mind as possible because I do understand the legitimate aspirations of Indigenous people, and I do understand their frustrations with the way for many years policy has been done to them, not with them, and they're on the receiving end of government dictates and not involved in the process of setting government policy. So I completely understand that, and I'm really keen to ensure that we develop a better system that involves Indigenous people better. But I do have those principled concerns, and I'm just looking forward to listening and hearing more detail.
If that proposal is the one that comes forward, would you actively campaign against it, given the issues, as you say, with passing referenda?
Well, Tom, the government itself has said that it will not be putting to a referendum a proposal along those lines. When that came out of the Uluru statement, the government was very clear in rejecting that approach.
As a previous leader, though.
Christian Porter, the Attorney-General, has repeated that view today, so I don't see any reasons why that changed. I mean, the reality is the government is not going to put forward a proposal that has a risk of failure. The government is only interested in putting forward a proposal that has a good chance of success, and I look forward to supporting any proposal that has a good chance of success. I don't think we'll be in a situation where we'll be putting forward a proposal that is politically divisive and contentious, because I think it will fail, and I think that would set back the cause of reconciliation.
The government's having a retirement income review. If you're going to have a review of this, does everything need to be on the table, including franking credits?
Well, reviews can look at everything and should look at everything, but what the government does in response to that will, of course, be dictated to by our policy positions. And coming out of the federal election, one thing is crystal clear, and that is that the Australian people do not want an attack on their retirement savings. They don't want an attack on their financial security and their plans for retirement. So I can't see any scenario in which the government would do anything to undermine people's confidence in the retirement system or change the goalposts on people who are already in retirement, which is what Labor took to the election. So my view is that reviews should be unconstrained, should be able to range over any areas and make any recommendations, but the government is not going to take up any recommendation that's contrary to policies we took to the election, obviously.
Could that mean, if there is a move within this area, if it's grandfathered, that would at least make it more palatable?
I think it's very, very unlikely, Tom, that we would contemplate any changes in that area. We have staunchly defended the franking credit system as a very legitimate part of the taxation system, which avoids double taxation, which is, in my view, world's best practice. So I don't anticipate that we'd be supporting any changes in that area. The fact that the Labor Party was unwilling to grandfather it, I think, did them incredible damage. And if they had a principled opposition to it, they could have proposed a grandfather change. But I'm not suggesting for a second that we would do that.
Just on that, though, you said you think it's world's best practice. I think we're the only country in the world that does it as well. Is it something that, at the very least, people need to keep an eye on within the government if this cost, as it's been increasing a lot in recent years, goes up and up and up and it really starts to drag on the budget?
Well, from a first principles basis, Tom, I don't accept that it's a cost to the budget. Letting people keep their own money is not a cost to the budget, and just because it takes the form of a tax refund. Well, I mean, cost to revenue. I mean, if you take it that point of view, then a personal income tax cut is a cost to revenue. Letting people keep the money that they've earned themselves is a cost to revenue, and anything other than 100% taxation is a cost to revenue. And the Liberal Party just doesn't have that philosophical basis.
So it doesn't matter how high the lost possible revenue, or whatever you want to brand it, doesn't matter how high it gets?
Well, I mean, if someone is paying 48 cents in the dollar in their personal income tax, Tom, is the 52 cents that they get to keep lost revenue to the government? I don't think so. That's not how we should think about taxation.
You understand my point, though, about how high this amount of franking credits, the cash refund, gets. That point, you're saying it doesn't matter how high it gets, we don't need to keep an eye on it.
Well, my view, Tom, is that double taxation is something that we should seek to avoid, and we could pretend that it's a cost to the budget to avoid taxing people twice, but taxing people twice is taxing people twice, and I don't think we should do that.
James Paterson, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Tom.